Today, April 19th, 2024, the Halifax-based music label Leaf Music released the debut solo album by Canadian pianist David Potvin. Called Catharsis, this album features music written by three fantastic Canadian composers, Jean Coulthard, Chris Dirksen, and Keiko DeVoe. Winnipeg audiences might know pianist David Potvin from his wonderful performance back in late November 2022 as part of the Women's Musical Club of Winnipeg's concert season. His performance here in Winnipeg was part of his 13 concert tour across Canada that he did as part of his winning of the 45th Ecart Grammaté National Music Competition. In addition to winning the very prestigious 45th Ecart Grammaté competition, Potvin has performed with violinist Martin Beaver. He has spent part. He's been part of other projects that have championed Canadian music, such as being part of a recording project where he recorded music of the Montreal-based composer Edward Enman, and he's performed in a recital that has featured the music of Jacques A2. And joining me here over Zoom to talk about his debut album Catharsis, I am joined by the one and only David Potvin. Hey, David, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Mhm. So the first obvious question is, how does it feel to have this album Catharsis finally come out?
Oh, well, it was a very long process. I mean, it started in the December of 2021 when I applied for the Eckhart Grammatic competition. So, I mean, in some ways leading up to it, it felt a little bit anticlimactic just because there was the process of working on it took such a long time. But now that it's out today, I'm very excited and I'm just really pleased that folks can hear it all over the world now.
Mm-hmm. It's just a great CD. You've got Chris Dirksen's piece, Growing Forgiveness, Jean Coulthard's 13 Preludes for the piano, and her piece, Contented House. And you also have Keiko DeVoe's piece, Murmuration. You performed this music, as we mentioned, during the Egray tour back in 2022. When was this album recorded, and how did you keep this music fresh? How did you keep it from going stale?
Well, the most important thing to keep music fresh is to perform it. So, obviously, in the fall of 2022, playing this music all around the country gave me new perspectives on it, and it was great to see audiences' reactions to it. And then, leading up to the recording, which took place in December of 2023, I did a few concerts performing the music. So that was a really important part of the process of finding my voices with the pieces and to keeping them fresh.
Hmm. I want to talk about the title of the disc. It's called Catharsis. Where does the title come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had a few working titles in my mind when I went into the recording process, but I think it was the middle of the night after day two. I sort of woke up in the middle of the night, and I don't want to say it came to me in a dream, but I sort of just woke up and I thought that's what I want to call this because I was looking for a concise title to encapsulate um, the way that this music accesses sort of deep emotional feelings and also the
Mhm.
way that the music ebbs and flows, how it has powerful climaxes, but also moments of reflection. And I felt that the type of music reflects a cathartic experience where you have sort of these deep held emotions. And then once they are finally expressed, you have a moment of a shift of perspective and hopefully some serenity afterwards. And maybe because it took so long to get this project going, and I've been playing the music so long, perhaps subconsciously it felt like a cathartic experience in itself.
Yeah, get it out there. Um, I have to say, it's terrific to hear this music. I want to start with the Chris Dirksen piece, Growing Forgiveness. This is a piece that was commissioned by the Eckhart Grammaté Foundation. Can you talk about that piece? It has a great structure to it. And also, where does the title come from?
Yeah, so Chris Durkin did a great interview that you can actually watch today on the Eckhart Grammaटे website,
Mhm.
where she was interviewed by, I think it was the chair of the board of the Eckhart Grammaटे competition, asking her about her piece because it was commissioned for the Eckhart Grammaटे competition. Every year they commission a work that all of the performers have to perform so that they have an equal measure to sort of judge everyone on. I suppose, and Dr. Megumi Masaki has sort of given the competition a mandate. She's the artistic director. She's given them a mandate to commission works by Indigenous composers. So
Mm,
I think it was a great choice of hers, so that because Chris Dirksen didn't have a piece written for solo piano that was sort of widely available before this. She's written lots of music in all sorts of different genres, but now we get to have one for piano. The name of it comes from some of her experiences during the pandemic. I would direct your listeners to sort of listen to her own thoughts on that. But as I understand it, there were, we all had some challenges in our relationships during the pandemic, and it was her reflection on that, and it was her sort of call to think about how we can find ways to find common ground in a time where there was lots of strife and lots of differing opinions about what was going on during those times. In
mm.
terms of the music, it's very typically of her genre, I think. It's got all sorts of wonderful energy to it. There's driving rhythms, and then a lot of her pieces have these beautiful middle sections, and this one's no exception.
Mm.
It's very serene and just lovely, and then it has these big climaxes too. So it's got runs the emotional gamut, I think.
Yeah, and there's that wonderful part. It's almost the beginning where she's got sort of repeated notes in one voice, and then these scalar. It's sort of sounds sort of very synthy. Yeah, yeah. No, it's
And
fantastic.
that's so great that it's great that you picked up on that, because she said in her interview that she felt they were very synthesizer-esque. Um, those are exactly her words.
Yeah, it reminded me actually growing up in the '80s and hearing the old synthesizers. Mm. The 13 preludes by Jean Coulthard that are on this CD were a revelation to me. They are absolutely excellent. When I was listening to them, all I could think of was it's a bit like if Scriabin and Debussy had kids. This is the music that kid would compose, perhaps with the exception of the 11th one, Spoof. Uh, can you talk about those preludes a bit?
Yeah, they're obviously wonderful pieces. They are very typical of her language. Jean Coulthard used an accessible language when she wrote music, and she was often criticized for it during her career. But I think that because she stuck to her guns and she kept writing in the way that resonated with her, that's what made her music so popular. I like how you compare them to Scriabin and Debussy. Certainly, she's been compared to Debussy a lot in her career. Um, each of them are unique, but they each have a type of flavor that really I felt that I could dig into. And in fact, I'm editing right now videos of sort of piano side chats where I made introductions to each one of them, and we recorded them over at the Menforger in December. And I'm still sort of editing those. So those are going to be released one by one in the coming days if your listeners want to
Fantastic.
follow me on Instagram or on my website. I can those will be uploaded to explain about each and every one of them. I think what is most interesting about them in terms of extra musical information is that each of them was dedicated to a friend of hers.
Mm,
And so they not only give a great survey of all of her compositional techniques, but they also give a great biographical survey of the people who were important to her during her life. She had a long and illustrious career teaching at the University of British Columbia, and so a lot of those connections are there. And there are a lot of there are a lot of pianists, Canadian pianists, to whom she dedicated them to that have sort of been lost from history a little bit. And
mm.
so it was really exciting for me to research some of these names and to say, oh, this was, a pianist who was active in the 80s, who was performing all over Canada, and who, we don't really hear anything about anymore. On the other hand, I was very grateful to meet and to talk with the dedicatee of the last three preludes, a wonderful pianist named Tu Hammer. And she sort of told me the story about how she commissioned Coulthard to write those last three preludes, which is great that she did, because Coulthard was a bit, she was a bit what's the word, superstitious, and so having a set of 13 pieces seems really on brand for her.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about that. One of the things I was noticing when I was listening to them, I was looking at the titles and I'm thinking, well, there's that one prelude called Dirge, and then there's another one called Dark Mood. And I was thinking, oh, this is going to be really heavy and, oppressive. But the preludes are not. It's like, they're very accessible and not, it's not a dirge, that prelude. It's a little bit more lively. Um, can you talk about how Coulthard perceived the prelude? My understanding was that she thought of it almost sort of like as a development of a piano sonata. Can you talk about some of the challenges that creates, and in particular, sort of developing musical ideas in just like 1 or 2 minutes, which is about the average length of each one of the preludes?
I think the most important thing for working in such a compact form is that you have to be totally committed to your interpretation. Of course, you have to be committed to your interpretation for any piece that you play, but if you were playing, for example, a whole sonata, the theme is restated several times. So if you have a two different ways that you like to do the phrasing for a certain theme, you can explore those different ways each time it repeats. But when
Hmm.
you have only one or two restatements of a theme, and it's an exploration more of uh, how you can develop that theme immediately, then you have to be very committed to exactly how you want to do it. And you have to make choices and sacrifices on for different ways that you might want to interpret it.
Hmm.
But it does make it very powerful, I think, because all of the material is crystallized into its densest form, and so it can cut straight to the heart right away.
Fantastic. Um, you've also arranged Jean Coulthard's orchestral piece, The Contented House, from her larger work, Mosaic. You've arranged it for the piano. Why did you feel that you wanted to arrange this music for the piano?
It's gorgeous. I would love to arrange the whole suite if I get time to do it, but that piece in particular is just. I don't want to say hauntingly beautiful, but it's beautiful in a way that just sticks in your head.
Hmm.
And and it hasn't really been performed that often. I mean, there's only one recording of it, and so I just wanted a way to further engage with that music. And biographically speaking, I did this at this around the same time that my son was born, and so he was, sleeping a lot during the day, as newborns do. So rather than practicing to prepare for my upcoming tour, I sort of got my Coulthard fix by working on this transcription, by looking at the full score, which of course, like much of her music, is only available in handwritten versions.
Hmm.
So I was working with interpreting some of her markings, and then just seeing what worked best on the piano, and gave me a new way to access this music, not just by listening, but I get to perform it.
Hmm. Uh, I was reading the booklet, and you said that while you were transcribing the music, you consulted the composers John Burge and Danuka Jaratne for advice. I've
Mhm.
interviewed Danuk. He is the nicest guy ever. What advice did they give you when it came to arranging that piece for the piano?
Um, Danook gave me some textural advice, how I could sort of fill out some of the sections with the left hand to give a little bit more support in the bass, to make it a little bit more pianistic, but to not sort of turn it into just a piano piece. Because there's two ways you can approach a transcription. You can write almost like a new piece, which Liszt would do, for example, with some pieces. Like, for example, I think of the Rigoletto paraphrase, which he took a quartet from an opera, but then he just turned it
Mm,
into a piano extravaganza. Or you can try to write a piece that is very much just a copy of that, but expressed to the piano, which is what I was trying to do. And so he helped me figure out a way to make it work better on the piano, but still keep fidelity to the score. And then John Burge is very, I suppose, precise musician. I mean, he nothing gets by him.
uh,
So I sent him my work, and he sort of pointed out some mistakes and helped me make sure that I was keeping fidelity to the score, and gave me some advice again, also on rhythmic and textural things that I could do that would make it more pianistic, um, but not just a piano piece. But
Yeah, and it works so well. It's really, really beautiful. The last work on the CD is Keiko DeVoe's piece, Murmuration. It's inspired by flocks of starlings and makes use of electroacoustic tape. When I was listening to it, it's like the tape is used as an accompaniment to the piano, but it's almost like a drone for part of it. But she actually does make use of bird sounds. Can you talk about that piece and maybe talk about some of the typical bird-like sounds that she incorporates into the piano writing?
hmm So, a murmuration is actually the name for a flock of starlings. So, any other bird you just call a flock, but Keiko told me that a flock of starlings is called a murmuration. So, that's where the title comes from. It's very literal. To create a lot of the sounds, I'll start with the sort of drone-like sounds. She told me she actually has a piano in her house that I played when I was playing the piece for her, and she was giving me advice on it. So she actually took recordings of her playing that piano and then manipulated them and
Mm,
used that as the basis for the tape part. I don't remember exactly where the bird sounds come from, but I think she recorded them herself from murmurations that she saw. Um, the piano definitely imitates bird sound, especially at the beginning. There are lots of flitting little gestural figures, and so she creates this effect where you have these sort of more sparse bird-like figures in the piano, and then they condense over time as the piece becomes more and more frantic. And then at the end of it, there's this huge climax, and often in pieces, we have a climax and then sort of a denouement or a moment for us to sort of collect ourselves, and the composer figures out a way to set down the piece gently or something. But in this, she goes right for it, and it just ends with a bang, which is really compelling in my opinion. And she said that she wanted to create the effect and the feeling in the listener of that franticness and almost menacing nature of the murmuration when it becomes threatened and the birds start to move really rapidly and really quickly to ward off any threat to them.
mm,
And I think the thing that she finds most compelling about the murmuration, which is why she wanted to write a piece about it, was how the birds are able to move in seemingly random patterns on an individual level without hurting themselves. But then when they do this, it coordinates and makes one great sweep in the way that the murmuration moves. And I think that she was able to really effectively imitate that for the piano and the tape.
It's wonderful. And for our Winnipeg listeners, the bird sounds that she used, if you've ever been out to Oakhammock Marsh, just outside the city here, it sounds exactly like that. It's wonderful. How does she notate on paper how the pianist is supposed to interact with the tape? How does that work?
Mm. Well, there are several stabs on top of each other. So for piano, you actually start out with four stabs.
Mm,
For listeners that might not know, usually you have notes are written with little dots on lines, and usually we have two sets of lines, but she wrote it as four sets of lines at the beginning. Um, and then there's another set of lines that have sort of images that represent what the tape is doing. And then she actually wrote in timestamps for when
okay.
certain things happen so that you can anticipate whether you need to speed up or slow down to be on track with what's happening. And she asked me at the beginning when we first met about this piece. She said, "So, what did you think about me spreading all of these staves out? Would you have preferred to have it condensed into just two staves like a normal score?" I said, "Well, no. I think it makes it clearer. You can clearly see what's happening when you sort of zoom it out that way." But she told me that she wanted to do it that way because it looks a little bit on the page like a bunch of birds sitting on a lot of different power lines. So I think in a way, she's really continuing the French tradition. I mean, she's trained in Montreal, which has ties to France and Paris. She's continuing that French tradition of being not only really concerned about the precision of the sounds that you're creating, but also about how the score looks, which I
Mm,
thought was a nice touch too.
fantastic. The CD is just great, David. Now that you've performed all this Canadian music, not only on this CD, but for other projects as well, how do you see yourself as a pianist? Do you want to make Canadian music your sole focus, or do you want to sort of incorporate Canadian music into recitals where there's more standard rep? Or for you, does that really matter?
Well, that's a great question, and I think it's something I'm still thinking about and that's still evolving throughout my career. For example, I'm going on tour this fall with Debut Atlantics. I'm doing a bunch of concerts in on the East Coast, and for that, I'm doing a mix of repertoire. The recital tour is called Prelude to an Evening, actually. So I'm performing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, for example, but then I'm also pairing that with the Coulthard Preludes. So that's the prelude part of the evening.
Uh,
And then there's some other pieces that are sort of around the same theme. And then when I was performing them last fall, I was interspersing Debussy preludes with the Coulthard preludes because I thought they complemented each other really well. And I was inspired by Bickinger Olufsen because he mixes and matches things and in some of his
mhm,
albums as well. And I thought it gives a new perspective to the repertoire, and I think it's important to, I mean, find a balance between championing Canadian music, but also um, to sort of put that music in context with how it fits into the broader picture of the repertoire that we have available to us as performers and as listeners.
mhm. I'm going to wrap up the conversation by asking, when people listen to the disc, what do you hope they're going to take away from the experience of listening to Catharsis?
Well, I hope for two things. I hope number one that they have their own emotional experiences to this, that it's a gratifying experience to them for the listeners. And number two, I hope that if they find something that they like, that they will be inspired to look for other compositions by these composers. Keiko DeVoe and Chris Dirksen are still working. They're still making music. They don't have that sort of same mythology to them as a composer who's passed away like Coulthard does. So, but they can still have lots of music that's out there that's accessible if people search for it.
Mm,
They've worked with many major Canadian orchestras. There's chamber music pieces. Dirksen has released two albums for solo cello and voice that are just wonderful. So I hope that this inspires people also to look for other music by other composers that they find resonate with them on the album.
mhm. David, this has just been so great to talk to you about your recording called Catharsis that is out today on the Leaf Music label. It is really, really great. Speaking for myself, who's listened to it a couple of times now, one of the things I appreciate about it is all the sounds are beautiful. The disc is never ever ugly. It's in our systems here at Classic 107 here in Winnipeg, and it is in rotation. All the best and bravo. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me today. This has been great.
Thanks very much, Chris.